ones. There comes a moment when leaving isn't an escape, it's an execution. The type of exit so precise, so flawlessly carried out, that even the universe pauses like, now that was strategic. And chosen one, that's exactly what you did. You didn't walk away, you orchestrated a masterpiece. You delivered an exit so clean it deserves replay angles, director's commentary, and yes, maybe even a standing ovation from the ancestors. Psychologists say that the human brain needs 6 to 8 attempts to finally leave a toxic dynamic. But your brain said, attempts? No. Let's do this in one calculated, elegantly engineered move. You didn't stumble out crying. You didn't storm out yelling. You didn't pack your bags in dramatic telenovela slow motion. No, you executed your exit with the precision of someone who rewrote the ending long before anyone realized the story had changed. And the suspense. Oh, you gave them premium-level suspense they were never ready for. While they believed you were still emotionally available, you were quietly unplugging your energy from the entire system. While they were bragging about how you'd never leave, you were drafting your exit blueprint like a seasoned strategist with a calm smile and a backup plan inside your backup plan. And the funniest part? They genuinely thought they were still in control. Bless their confidence, truly. You didn't leave a relationship, a friendship, a family pattern, or whatever dynamic held you. You dismantled an illusion. You slipped out so smoothly that by the time they realized you were gone, all that remained was the echo of your absence and the outline of their own mistakes. This wasn't an exit. This was a finale. A closing chapter so brilliantly delivered that anyone watching from the spiritual balcony had to whisper, "Give that chosen one an Oscar," because that performance was immaculate. So buckle up, because today we're breaking down the kind of exit that wasn't survival. It was strategy, not desperation, execution, not drama, mastery. And if they're still confused about how you pulled it off, good. A legendary exit is supposed to leave them speechless. Number 1, you didn't escape. You engineered a psychological departure. Most people think leaving a toxic situation is about physically walking out the door, but you did something far more sophisticated. You didn't just remove yourself from their presence, you took control of your own mind first, creating a space they could no longer reach. You understood that their influence wasn't just external, it had rooted itself inside your thoughts, your habits, your emotions. So instead of reacting, panicking, or making a scene, you dismantled the hold they had over you quietly and methodically. Every interaction became data, every manipulation became evidence, and every attempt to pull you back was met with inner resistance they couldn't even see. You weren't running away, you were rewriting the rules of the game. You planned your mental departure in layers. First, you detached emotionally without making it obvious. You stopped investing energy in their chaos, stopped validating their power over you, and stopped responding to the little traps they laid. Then you began redirecting your focus toward yourself, your goals, and your own freedom. By the time your physical exit happened, it was almost anticlimactic. You were already gone in every meaningful way. They might have noticed your body leaving, but your presence had already evaporated from their control. That is mastery. That is intelligence applied with surgical precision. The beauty of this type of departure is that it leaves no evidence of struggle, no drama to exploit, and no unfinished business to haunt you later. You engineered it so that your exit felt inevitable to them, even though it was entirely orchestrated. Your mind was the first to walk away, and once it did, the body simply followed. They can talk about it, speculate about it, even resent it, but they cannot undo it. They cannot touch what you took with you, your clarity, your autonomy, your peace. You didn't just leave, you dismantled their influence from the inside out, proving that the strongest exits are not the loudest. They are the ones executed with invisible precision, leaving everyone else stunned at the performance they didn't see coming. Number 2, you studied their patterns. So well, you could predict their next move before they did. You didn't leave by chance. You left because you understood the game better than anyone else in it. You paid attention to everything, the subtle changes in tone, the way they repeated the same manipulations, the timing of their moods, the way they tried to corner you emotionally. While they assumed they were unpredictable and chaotic, you quietly mapped out their patterns, memorized their triggers, and anticipated their moves before they even thought about making them. Every action they took, every word they said, became a piece of a puzzle that only you had the key to solve. Your exit was not reactive. It was premeditated, calculated, and perfectly timed. This kind of awareness is rare because most people operate from emotion instead of strategy. They react to their feelings, respond to drama, and assume control is about presence and pressure. You understood that real control comes from observation and foresight. You knew that if you waited for the perfect moment, the exit would feel seamless, not chaotic, not desperate. You didn't need to prove anything to anyone, because you already knew the outcome in your mind. The precision of your actions made it impossible for them to anticipate your departure until it was too late. They thought they were the ones shaping reality, but in truth, you had been quietly shaping it around yourself the entire time. Every interaction was data. Every confrontation was a test. Every attempt to manipulate or provoke you was already accounted for in your strategy. They may have believed they were winning, that they had you figured out, but in reality, you were always 2 steps ahead, already preparing the path for your escape. By the time you left, it wasn't just your body that was gone. It was the evidence of their power over you. You had outmaneuvered them mentally before the physical exit even occurred. The result wasn't just freedom. It was a performance of intelligence, patience, and strategy so flawless that it left them confused, exposed, and unable to understand how they had lost control over someone they thought they knew inside and out. Number 3. You turned their manipulation into a blueprint of what not to tolerate again. You didn't leave confused, bitter, or broken. You left enlightened. Every lie, every slight, every manipulation became a lesson carved into your awareness. What most people see as pain or betrayal, you saw as data, an instruction manual for the next phase of your life. Every tactic they used to control or undermine you became a warning sign you will never ignore again. You didn't allow their actions to shape your self-worth or define your limits. Instead, you extracted the knowledge embedded in their behavior and used it to reinforce your boundaries and sharpen your instincts. By the time you executed your exit, you weren't running from them. You were running toward a version of yourself that they couldn't touch. You transformed their toxicity into a roadmap, showing clearly what is unacceptable, what is draining, and what is harmful. Each interaction was studied, analyzed, and filed mentally under lessons like never compromise core values for approval and recognize subtle control before it escalates. You didn't waste energy on revenge or resentment. You channeled everything they threw at you into preparation, foresight, and clarity. Their manipulation stopped being a weapon against you. It became a tool for your evolution. This approach is what makes your departure exceptional. Most people leave a toxic dynamic only to repeat the same patterns elsewhere because they never fully understand what went wrong. You, however, extracted every hidden code from the chaos. You left with a manual etched into your mind, ensuring you will never fall prey to the same tactics again. They tried to bend you, deceive you, and make you doubt yourself, but every attempt strengthened your resolve. Their energy no longer has power over you. Instead, it fuels your ability to recognize and avoid toxic patterns before they even form. When you walked away, you weren't just leaving them. You were walking away armed with the ultimate intelligence. Experience turned into wisdom. They thought they were shaping your story, but in reality, they were just providing the raw material for your next level. You turned manipulation into mastery, chaos into strategy, and their attempts to control you into a lifelong blueprint for self-preservation and empowerment. Number 4. You played along. Long enough to let them reveal themselves completely. You didn't rush to judge them, confront them, or force the truth out of them. You allowed time to do its job. You let their behavior unfold naturally, without interference, without warnings, without emotional reactions that would tip them off. Your patience wasn't passivity, it was strategy. While they assumed you were blind, naive, or easily misled, you were quietly studying them with full awareness. You watched how they treated you when they thought you couldn't see the cracks. You observed how they acted when they believed they had the upper hand. And slowly, they revealed their entire character without you having to lift a finger. Every lie they told became a confession. Every manipulation they attempted became proof. Every contradiction they slipped into became another piece of the puzzle falling into place. And you didn't interrupt their performance. You let them continue believing they were fooling you. The truth is, they weren't performing for you. They were performing for themselves. They were showing exactly who they were when they felt comfortable, when they believed they had you under control. You didn't have to expose them. They exposed themselves through their own actions, their own arrogance, their own inconsistencies. By keeping still, you created the perfect environment for their true nature to leak through. People reveal the most when they think you aren't paying attention. You gave them just enough space and silence to hang themselves with their own behavior. That's why when you finally executed your exit, you weren't conflicted, unsure, or emotional. You were at peace. You already had every answer you needed. You already had evidence burned into your memory. There was nothing left to investigate or question. You walked away clean because you left with clarity. You didn't leave based on assumptions. You left based on undeniable truth they handed to you willingly. They can lie to others, rewrite the story, or pretend you misunderstood, but deep down, you know the reality. They revealed themselves fully, and you simply stepped out once the final mask dropped. Number 5. You pretended you didn't notice the shifts, but you clocked everything. You didn't react to the changes, you registered them. Every off comment, every strange pause, every sudden coldness, every sly jab. You caught all of it, but instead of calling it out, you kept your face calm and your spirit steady. That wasn't ignorance, it was discipline. You understood that confronting every shift only feeds the game and exposes your awareness too early. So you chose to observe, quietly, consistently, masterfully. They mistook your silence for confusion. They believed you were too trusting, too innocent, too loyal to pick up on the subtle disrespect that dripped between their words and actions. They assumed you were lost in the emotional fog they created. What they didn't know was that you were wide awake, fully conscious, and taking mental notes on everything. You were paying attention to the way their energy changed when certain people walked in the room. You noticed how their tone softened for others, but sharpened for you. You caught the way they suddenly needed control, validation, or an audience whenever insecurity kicked in. Nothing slipped by you, not the patterns, not the lies, not the micro-adjustments in how they treated you depending on what they needed that day. You didn't confront because you didn't need to. You weren't collecting evidence to argue. You were collecting evidence to exit. Each shift became another tally mark in your mind, another reminder that the dynamic was changing in ways you couldn't trust, another confirmation that the connection wasn't safe anymore. You let them think they had you fooled, and that was your power. They stayed predictable while you stayed prepared. By the time you finally walked away, you weren't acting out of impulse or confusion. You were acting out of accumulated truth. Your exit wasn't emotional. It was documented. It was the final entry in a long list of receipts they didn't even realize you were keeping. They thought you were oblivious, but you were simply patient. They thought you didn't notice, but you noticed everything. And that's exactly why leaving felt like clarity, not chaos. Number 6. You created distance in phases, not emotionally, logistically. You didn't make your exit obvious. You didn't slam doors, threaten to leave, or give dramatic warnings. You were too smart for that. Instead, you began creating distance the way a strategist prepares for a major move, quietly, steadily, and in phases. While they were laser-focused on manipulating your emotions, you were busy rearranging your life piece by piece. They thought they were influencing your heart, but you were restructuring your future. Your first shift was internal, not emotional, practical. You stopped sharing certain parts of your life, stopped updating them on your plans, stopped letting them know your next step. Little by little, you shrank the access they once had. They didn't notice at first because emotional people rarely notice logistical changes. You weren't acting distant, you were acting organized. You started saving your energy, your money, your time. You repositioned yourself so that when the moment came, you wouldn't need their approval, their support, or their presence. Then you shifted your habits. You built new routines that didn't include them. You found new sources of peace, new people who uplifted you, new environments that felt safe. You reduced the power they had by reducing the space they occupied. They were still playing emotional chess, unaware that you had already moved your queen to the other side of the board. Your priorities changed next. You stopped placing them at the center of your world. You stopped reacting to their moods. You stopped letting their chaos dictate your behavior. Your attention drifted from pleasing them to preparing for yourself. That's when the real transformation began. Once your priorities shifted, every decision naturally aligned with your freedom rather than their control. And finally, when the physical exit happened, it wasn't a shock for you, only for them. You had already detached from the inside out. You had already built the foundation for your new life. You had already disconnected mentally, spiritually, and practically. All that was left was the final step, which felt more like confirmation than departure. By the time they realized what was happening, you were already gone. Not just from their life, but from the space in yourself where they once held influence. Your exit was smooth because your preparation was flawless. They were trying to break your spirit, not knowing you had already packed it up and moved it somewhere they could never reach. Number 7. You gave them the illusion of access. While you were already rewriting your life story, you didn't snatch your energy away all at once. You allowed them to believe they still had a place in your life, still had influence, still had access. But what they never realized was that the version of you they were interacting with was outdated. They were speaking to the echo of who you used to be, not the person you were becoming. You were already editing them out of the narrative long before they had any clue. You were adjusting your mindset, shifting your loyalties, and building a direction that no longer included their presence. And because you didn't announce the changes, they assumed nothing changed. That was your advantage. You learned to give them just enough warmth to avoid suspicion, but not enough to regain control. You responded without engaging. You interacted without inviting. You kept the peace without keeping the connection. It wasn't manipulation, it was self-preservation. You were giving your future the attention they believed still belonged to them. Every day, you placed another brick in the foundation of the new life you were preparing. Meanwhile, they kept talking to you as if you were still emotionally wrapped around their finger. They didn't realize they were speaking to a version of you that had already begun to dissolve. This illusion protected your transformation. When someone believes they still have access, they stop paying attention to your subtle moves. They underestimate you. They stay too confident to intervene. That allowed you to work on yourself, without interruption, without sabotage, without pressure. You were growing in silence, while they remained distracted by their own self-importance. By the time you stepped fully into your new chapter, it wasn't even a shock for you. It was a natural progression. The disconnect had already happened internally. The emotional ties had already loosened. The mental space they once occupied had already been cleared out. You didn't slam the door. You simply stopped opening it. They thought your story couldn't move forward without them, not knowing you had rewritten the entire plot and removed their character months before the final goodbye. Number 8. You withstood the emotional whiplash without retaliating, which proved your mastery over self. You didn't match their chaos with chaos. You didn't throw back the insults, defend your name in every argument, or try to outshout their drama. You didn't need to. You had already risen above the level where retaliation felt satisfying. That alone separated you from them more than anything else. While they were switching moods like channels, warm one day, cold the next, supportive for a moment, hostile 5 minutes later, you refused to let their instability pull you into emotional gymnastics. You stayed steady even when they came at you sideways, because you knew reacting would only feed the cycle you were preparing to leave behind. Your silence wasn't submission, it was self-command. It was the quiet confirmation that you were no longer available as a participant in their emotional games. They tried to bait you, provoke you, guilt-trip you and confuse you, expecting you to break your composure like before. But the more they pushed, the more they exposed their own lack of control. And the more you stayed calm, the more you revealed your growth. You weren't engaging because there was nothing left to win in the argument. The real victory was happening inside you. This is where the difference becomes clear. Some people stay trapped because they can't resist the urge to respond. They get pulled back into conflict, into defending themselves, into trying to make the other person see their wrongs. You chose peace over proving a point. That's the level of maturity that leads to permanent exits, not temporary escapes followed by emotional returns. Your discipline confused them more than any words could. Power is loud to the untrained, but real power is quiet. You controlled your reactions, not to impress them, but to protect yourself. You didn't allow their instability to unbalance you. Instead, you let their behavior reveal everything while your restraint revealed your evolution. By the time you walked away, you were already operating on a higher emotional frequency, one they couldn't reach or disrupt. You didn't win by fighting back. You won by refusing to fight at all, proving that the strongest version of you was the one who stopped performing for their chaos and started listening to your own inner authority. Number 9. You allowed them to think they were winning because you knew the final move was yours. You never interrupted their delusion. You didn't argue with them when they bragged. You didn't try to correct their inflated confidence. You didn't rush to explain what you were truly thinking or how deeply you saw through everything. You simply let them believe the story they were telling themselves. And the beauty of that decision is that it kept them predictable, loud, careless, and completely unaware of the quiet strategy you were building behind the scenes. They mistook your calm for defeat, not knowing calm is the posture of someone who's already 10 steps ahead. They assumed your silence meant they had outsmarted you. They thought every emotional reaction they provoked, every guilt trip they attempted, every moment of confusion they created was evidence that they were in control. They didn't realize you were letting them run the same tired playbook because you wanted to see exactly how far they were willing to go. Their arrogance became your intel. Their confidence became your cover. You weren't reacting, not because you didn't care, but because reacting would expose your awareness too early. You understood something they didn't. The one who feels the need to win early rarely wins at all. You gave them room to gloat, to underestimate you, to think they had outmaneuvered you. You allowed them to believe your emotional energy was still tied to them, but every time they celebrated what they thought was your weakness, you were simply repositioning your strength. That's what made your exit so flawless. While they were performing victory laps over battles that didn't matter, you were quietly preparing the only move that would end the entire game. You knew there was no need to fight every small moment because you had already chosen the moment that mattered, the final one. And when you made that move, it shifted everything instantly. They didn't see it coming because they were too focused on the short-term wins, too busy admiring their temporary advantages to notice you were building the permanent outcome. When you finally walked out, the checkmate was undeniable. They had no counter, no defense, no power left. You didn't need to prove you were winning. You simply positioned yourself so that when the final move came, the entire board spoke for you. Number 10. You didn't just leave them behind. You left behind the version of yourself they could manipulate. They're confused right now because they're chasing the ghost of someone who no longer exists. The person they were able to guilt trip, destabilize, or emotionally puppeteer, that version of you has been permanently retired. They're dealing with the after-image, not the actual you. Your exit wasn't a walk-away moment. It was a spiritual metamorphosis. You didn't just detach from people. You detached from the identity they built around you. Because let's be honest, they never interacted with you. They interacted with the version of you they benefited from. And once you realized that, once you finally saw how they weaponized your empathy, your loyalty, your patience, and your vulnerability, something in you died. And in that death, something greater was born. You didn't leave out of anger. Anger is too low frequency for the level you're on. You left because the self who tolerated their behavior no longer matched your consciousness. That old version of you existed in a lower dimension of awareness, and the moment you upgraded, you automatically became incompatible with their manipulation tactics. They're shocked because they thought they were irreplaceable in your life, but they never considered you might outgrow yourself. They thought the dynamic would last forever because they assumed your identity was fixed. They assumed their influence over you was permanent, not realizing that influence only works when the target remains unchanged. What they're dealing with now is the evolved you, the version who remembers who they are, honors their gift, and protects their spirit. They're trying to replay old games with someone who has transcended the board. Now they're frustrated, calling you cold, distant, different, unrecognizable. But that's exactly the point. You didn't walk away from them. You walked away from the person who allowed them. This is why they can't reach you. This is why their old tricks fall flat. This is why their words no longer stick. This is why their presence no longer penetrates. They're knocking on a door that no longer leads to a home. They're calling a number that no longer exists. They're trying to access a system that has already been upgraded beyond their clearance level. And what hurts them the most? You didn't become a new person because of them. You became a new person in spite of them. That's why they're stunned. That's why they're restless. That's why they're still talking, because they finally realized they lost access not because you left, but because the version of you they controlled was temporary, and you were always destined to become the version they could never reach. Number 11. You escaped the dynamic without becoming a fragment of it. What they still can't comprehend is how you managed to exit the storm without carrying its debris. Most people who escape toxicity don't leave. They leak. They leak bitterness, suspicion, emotional exhaustion, and hardened edges for years. They become walking souvenirs of the pain that broke them. But you walked away untouched. Not unhurt, but untouched. Meaning, you refused to let the pain sculpt you into a smaller, colder, more defensive version of yourself. You broke the cycle without becoming the cycle. The greatest victory of a chosen one is not escape, it's preservation. It's making it out with your softness still operational, your heart still compassionate, your mind still capable of love, your spirit still open to joy. That kind of resilience terrifies people because it exposes their own inability to recover without becoming replicas of what wounded them. Your purity survived where most people's purity collapses. Your empathy survived where most people's empathy calcifies. Your ability to love, trust, and feel deeply survived environments specifically designed to destroy those capacities. And this is why they can't stop thinking about you. This is why your absence unsettles them. This is why your name stays in their conversations, even long after you've moved on. Because they expected you to leave broken. They planned for that outcome. They expected you to emerge bitter. They counted on it. They expected you to self-destruct quietly. They were emotionally preparing for it. But you came out better, not bitter. Sharper, not shattered. Awake, not wounded. Clear, not contaminated. You did not inherit their dysfunction. You did not mirror their cruelty. You did not absorb their projections. You walked away with your identity intact, your spirit uninfected, and your moral compass straightened, not warped by their chaos. That's not just strength, that's transcendence. You didn't escape the fire, you outgrew it, and the fire had no choice but to let you go. The real revenge is not destroying what hurt you. The real revenge is becoming someone the hurt couldn't destroy. You didn't transition with scars. You transitioned with clarity. Clarity about your worth, clarity about your boundaries, clarity about your destiny, clarity about what you will never allow again. And that clarity is something they can never take credit for, but it is something they'll forever remember losing you to. Number 12. You realized that peace doesn't arrive. It's reclaimed. Peace wasn't something you waited for. It wasn't something you hoped would eventually show up after the arguments, the tension, the manipulation, and the emotional unpredictability. You didn't sit around praying that things would calm down on their own. At some point you understood that peace isn't delivered, it's recovered. And the moment that realization hit, everything in you shifted. Your exit wasn't an escape. It was a retrieval mission. You weren't walking away from them. You were walking back toward yourself. You were reclaiming the calm they chipped away at, reclaiming the confidence they eroded, reclaiming the inner stillness they kept trying to disturb. It wasn't a dramatic ending. It was a quiet homecoming. You remembered who you were before the chaos swept you into its cycle. And once that memory resurfaced, it became your compass. Peace had always been yours. It didn't disappear. It was buried under survival mode, over-explaining, over-trying, and shrinking yourself to keep the atmosphere stable. You had been negotiating with stress for so long that silence felt foreign and calm felt suspicious. But even then, you still knew something wasn't right. Something sacred inside you had been placed on hold, waiting for your permission to return. And when you finally identified that feeling, everything clicked. You understood that your peace wasn't gone. It was held hostage by the environment you tolerated. And once you reclaimed it, it felt less like a reward, and more like a restoration of what never should have been disturbed in the first place. This is why your departure hit differently. You didn't leave angry or broken. You left aligned. You left with your sense of direction restored. You left with clarity, not confusion. Your peace came back the moment you chose yourself without apologizing for it. And that's what they can't wrap their heads around. They thought you would fall apart without them. They thought your peace depended on their presence, their validation, or their approval. They believed they were the center of your emotional reality. But peace was never something they could give you. It was simply something they could disrupt. Once you reclaimed it, everything they built on top of your silence collapsed. Because the truth is simple. Peace doesn't show up at your doorstep. Peace returns when you finally stop inviting chaos in. Number 13, you didn't ghost them. You graduated from them. Your disappearance wasn't some petty tactic. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't emotional warfare. You didn't vanish to make a statement. You outgrew the entire environment. And when you outgrow something, you don't argue with it, negotiate with it, or send a memo explaining why you're leaving. You simply move to the next level. That's why your absence confused them so deeply. They expected drama, because drama is the only language they understood. They expected conflict, because conflict is the only tool they ever used to hold people in place. But instead of combusting, you evolved. You recognized that the connection wasn't a relationship, it was an outdated curriculum. You had already learned every lesson, the manipulation patterns, the inconsistencies, the emotional traps, the cycles that repeated like a broken record. And once you mastered the lesson, staying any longer would have meant repeating a subject you were already too advanced for. They didn't realize that while they were still studying how to control you, you were studying how to outgrow them. That's why your exit was so quiet. Graduation isn't loud, it's a transition. It's a step into a higher arena where the old teachers no longer have authority over you. You didn't ghost them, you simply walked into a space where their access pass no longer worked. Your energy shifted into a realm where they couldn't follow because growth requires emotional intelligence they never invested in cultivating. They're stuck trying to rewrite the ending, confused about how you slipped through their grasp without a final argument or one last plea for clarity. They don't understand that you reached a version of yourself that no longer responds to chaos. You weren't looking for closure, you became the closure. You closed the chapter by leveling up, and the moment you did, everything tied to the old version of you fell off naturally. They keep rereading the story, trying to figure out the moment they lost control. But the truth is simple. They lost control the second you gained awareness. The moment you understood the dynamics, the illusions shattered. The moment you saw through the role you were cast in, you stepped off the stage. You didn't ghost them, you just graduated. And now they're stuck in last year's lesson, trying to understand someone who no longer lives in that classroom. Number 14. You didn't just execute the exit, you executed the evolution. Your departure wasn't a final act. It was the opening scene of a brand new version of yourself. Leaving wasn't the goal, transformation was. You didn't simply remove yourself from their reach or from the patterns that held you down. You stepped into a space they were never meant to occupy, a reality that could only exist once you shed the old constraints, old expectations, and old versions of yourself. The exit was just the visible part of the performance. The evolution was happening quietly, profoundly, and irreversibly. Most people leave situations and think that's enough, that walking away is a victory. But true victory isn't physical distance, it's metamorphosis. You didn't just leave to escape. You left to unlock parts of yourself that could never emerge in that environment. While they were still running their same games, trying to predict or provoke, you were quietly reinventing your habits, your mindset, your energy, and your standards. Every step away from them was a step toward a higher self, one that no longer fit into the story they had written for you. This is why your exit feels untouchable. They might chase, speculate, or rage. They might try to make sense of it, but they cannot reach the upgraded version of you. You didn't win by merely leaving their orbit. You won by becoming someone they could never access while still there. You redefined yourself on a level that isn't visible to them, but is undeniable to the universe. Every boundary you set, every choice you made, every moment of self-discipline was part of the blueprint for the new life you were constructing. And the brilliance of it all? You didn't just survive, you thrived. You didn't just detach, you ascended. The exit was your statement, but the evolution is your legacy. What they see as a disappearance, a loss, or a mystery is really your rise into a self-directed reality where their influence no longer matters. You didn't leave to be free. You evolved to be extraordinary. You didn't execute an exit, you executed an evolution, and that is a victory they will never understand, only witness from the sidelines. Conclusion. You didn't just walk away, you orchestrated a masterpiece of strategy, clarity, and self-mastery. Every step of your departure was calculated, every move executed with precision, and every silence loaded with power. You didn't leave because you were weak or desperate. You left because you were conscious, aware, and unwilling to remain in an environment that no longer